My name is Tiffany Hayes. I'm the continuing education consultant here at the State Library, and my contact information is there on the screen. If you have further questions or other continuing education needs after the session, please feel free to email me. We do have a few more people joining here, not a huge group today, but we will go ahead and get started. Trying to keep an eye on everyone just joining us here. I don't want to miss anyone. So today we're going to be talking about a few things related to libraries, and starting with what's the purpose of a library, what makes it a significant institution in the community. We're also going to cover some library ethics, which is a lot more hands-on and less dry than it sounds here on the page. And then we'll move on to some common customer service situations. So in the chat, just chat and tell the group your name, your location, and how long you've been working in libraries. The chat feature should be on your control panel there under perhaps the More button. There we go. Heather, 15 years. Yeah, I'm about at that. I've been at the State Library. It'll be 4 years this summer. Previously to that, I was in North Carolina for about 12 years. Wow, we've got some very experienced library staff here. 5 months. Hope you're liking it so far. Charleston. Good to see Charleston here. Just started working there in December. What a year to start in a library. It's been kind of chaotic. Richland Library, good to see everyone. Lexington. Anderson County. We've got quite a bit of experience here, which is great. So what's the purpose of the library in your community? What does the library do? We sometimes feel like we do all sorts of things for all sorts of people. For those of you, especially who are relatively new to libraries, is there anything surprising that you do that when you started there, you thought, well, that wasn't my idea of a library. I didn't know that that was a thing that we would be doing. And this may have even changed in the past year or so, the purpose that you're serving and the things that you're offering to your patrons. So again, go ahead and type in the chat. What are some things that your library does? Yes, a place for people to ask for help and information. And yeah, you don't have to pay to be in a library. Nobody's trying to sell you something. You can come in and use the library. It's one of the very few spaces where you can be there without consuming a good or purchasing anything or transacting business in any way. You can just be there. I can't think of too many places like that. What else? Yes, community gardens, that's becoming a very common thing. Helping people find jobs and providing internet at all in a lot of cases. Uh, yes, lots of that going on, particularly now. What else do we do? Anything different or unusual, as well as some common things that you find? Community, yes, passport and notary services. Yeah, not everybody offers that, but it's great. Helping students, that's a very common library thing, but I don't think we can underestimate the importance. Yes, sometimes people just need someone to talk to. It helps people get out of the house and see other people. That's been a little bit challenging over the past several months, but yes. Yes, passes for parks. That's a relatively new thing that we are partnering with the Parks and Rec Department for that. Checking out items other than books, audiobooks, movies, etc. Does anyone check out other things? I think Richland does. Yes, homebound services. Services to people that can't make it into the library for whatever reason. Yes, telescopes, also checking out all sorts of non-traditional library items. Hotspots, yes. All of these wonderful things that the library is doing for the community. Yes, seed libraries, databases, ancestry.com, maker spaces. I know Richland has some very nice creative spaces, particularly. For those of you who are coming from a non-library background, who maybe have had different customer service interactions or have worked with the public in another capacity, are there any differences between the library and your previous customer service related jobs? Are there differences in customers or the way you offer services or the service philosophy, any of that? Yeah, we're not trying to sell a product or to make a profit. We're here strictly for information needs and to meet the needs of the community. I think that takes a little pressure off of both the patron and the library staff to not have to upsell anything. Anyone else? Anything different from your traditional customer service? Or similarities for that matter. If you've worked with customers in other jobs, what similarities do you notice perhaps? Yes, good customer service interactions. It's always really positive when you can help somebody get the things that they need. Compared to being a case manager for any kind of a social service or a public service, that's similar to working in healthcare. You maybe are not seeing people at their happiest or most secure moments. I think we're a very nice profession. Everybody I know in libraries really wants to help the patrons and find the information. Other comments? So we do work in a profession that's a little different in orientation and purpose than you might get from a lot of other customer service type jobs. Even if you're in another nonprofit or government organization like social services or health services, you're still there to have a transaction, to provide a service or a product or a piece of assistance or information, whereas libraries are very much um, it's less transactional, I think. It's much more interactional. Yes. Working retail is great preparation for being a library staff member. People can be a little challenging, but I think the library environment is slightly less stressful and pressurized in a lot of cases. Okay. So another difference that frequently we don't talk about this enough necessarily. It's easy to get bogged down in the transactions and the everyday, how do I print, how do I fax, can you help me with this question kind of things. And we don't realize that our profession is built on this set of ethics that comes up really frequently in a lot of our everyday interactions with patrons, even the ones that we don't necessarily think of as being an ethical dilemma of such. So we have a few things here that we're going to look at, and we'll walk through this and discuss some scenarios here. The first is the ALA Code of Ethics and also the Library Bill of Rights. And those two I included in the email just prior to the session this morning as PDF documents, and you can also find them at these links. Also, not really necessarily ethics, but more of a guiding principle is these 5 laws of library science, which we'll also talk about that kind of overarching principles of what we're doing here in a library. And this final link, and you should have the slides also in the email previously, a very good self-paced course about library ethics with this ABLE course, if you'd like to get more scenarios than what we're working on today. So, library ethics. And now I don't normally do this with the text heavy slides and like reading through, but I feel like we need an overview to kind of base our discussion on today. So I am going to read briefly through this, but I've tried to highlight in red the important points of these topics so that they're a little more visible, so we're not quite so text heavy. So apologies for the very heavy text reading slides. We'll try and move through the informational part a little more quickly so we can get on to the practical application. And as I said, a lot of these code of ethics sounds very big picture and principles and you know, what could that possibly have to do with the everyday? This is the stuff they talk about in library school. You know, I'm just trying to help this person print something out on the computer. But there's actually a lot of practical application for all of these topics here. So, Code of Ethics highest level of service to all library users through appropriate and usefully organized resources, equitable service policies, equitable access, and accurate, unbiased, and courteous responses to all requests. The second one here, we uphold the principles of intellectual freedom and resist censoring library resources. Incidentally, some of these cover not just the customer service aspect, but also other aspects of the profession like collection maintenance. So we will be coming back to these later in the series, especially with this censoring library resources and intellectual freedom, very collection related. Also that usefully organized appropriate resources and policies, etc. So keep these in mind and you'll be seeing them again as well. Third, we protect the library user's right to privacy and confidentiality about the information sought or received, resources consulted, borrowed, acquired, or transmitted. We respect intellectual property rights and advocate balance between the interests of information users and rights holders. We don't often think of this number 5 in terms of ethics, but it's a very important piece. We treat our coworkers and other colleagues with respect, fairness, and good faith, and advocate conditions of employment that safeguard the rights and welfare of employees in our institutions. We don't advance private interests at the expense of library users, colleagues, or institutions, etc. We distinguish between personal convictions and professional duties. Don't allow our personal beliefs to interfere with representation of the aims of our institutions or provision of access. We strive for excellence in the profession by maintaining and enhancing our own knowledge and skills, by encouraging professional development of coworkers, and by fostering the aspirations of potential members of the profession. Honestly, this one here, I feel like library staff are some of the most curious, learning-oriented people out there. So it's always enjoyable to see the amount of learning that goes on. So what do these mean? I'm going to put some scenarios here and I'll read them out and also put them in the chat. So barriers to service. We talked about that in the point 1 here. What would be some barriers to service for some potential patrons? This can be any type of patron. I'll go back to that slide and we'll take a look. So number 1 here. Language barriers, yes. What else? Fines, yes. Fines can be a big barrier to service for a lot of our patrons. Mobility, inability to get to the library, yes. Can't access the services if we can't get them to the library or get the library to them in some manner. What else? Physical access, yes. Are your facilities themselves accessible? We have around the state, if you ever go elsewhere and visit libraries, I mean, I go into a lot of libraries in the course of working here, but if you do library tourism like some of us do and go into other libraries, you will see a lot of older buildings have stairs and access problems, and it's very hard for all users to use those things. Hours of operation, yes, if especially smaller locations, if you're open, you know, 10 to 5 every day, weekdays, and not on weekends, you're cutting off a lot of population. What else? Anything else? Perhaps the requirements to get a library card in some cases, or restrictions perhaps based on the patron's age. Big one lately is, do they have internet access? Can they access our services other than by physically coming into the building? And we've seen that over the past year or so. Limited selection, yeah, that's a tough one because it's so dependent on resources and money. You know, how do you make a good selection of resources on such a limited budget that we have? And again, we talk about that as well in the collection maintenance class. How about this second one? Principles of intellectual freedom. So an example of that, and you may have run into this, you see it a lot, especially with parents being concerned about what their kids are reading. Can happen with other titles, but if you get people concerned about library resources, it's frequently about children's collections or materials or what their kids have checked out. So for example, you have a parent, they bring several books to the desk, they have a complaint. Their child has found these in the adult nonfiction section, and they have content about the supernatural, perhaps some witchcraft or astrology, those, what is it, Sandra Brown ones in like the beginning section of the nonfiction. I can't think of the call number right offhand. She'd like you to put a note in the daughter's record of, please don't let my child check out these items. What do you tell this parent? It's a very concerned parent not wanting her kid to have access to these resources. Feel free to type in chat. Think about your response here. No ideas? What would you do? What would you say? The parent wants you to tell the child not to check out those items. Does your library have a policy about this? Parental choice, yes. Can someone expand on that? Yes, some library systems choose to allow parents to limit children to a juvenile materials only card, and that's through the catalog. Is there an age limit on that? Like if the kid is 16, can the parent still only put the block on the card, or is that more for like small children? That's a very difficult one. Any other libraries have different policies on this? Yes. Juvenile cards, I understand that they're convenient to parents, but they do, if you're limiting to access, a lot of teen collections, our teen materials are frequently in the adult side and not the kids side, because we don't necessarily want the teens to feel as though they're going in with the tiny children. So this is an issue, and the important part here is, yeah, that is, that's a pretty common policy. The important thing here in the chat is we cannot prevent patrons of any age from checking out materials. If you would like your child to not check out certain materials, you may monitor your own child's checkouts. That's, we do not act in public libraries. School libraries are different slightly than public libraries, but we do not act in public libraries as parents. We cannot make parental decisions. We don't have that kind of control. So we encourage parents to check out their monitor their children's reading habits for themselves and discuss that with the kids on an individual basis. Because logistically, this is what I usually tell the parents, thank you for being involved in your child's reading habits. It's great that you're keeping an eye on what your kids are reading. That's a very important thing. We are not able to do that, because imagine if we had to do that for every kid that comes in the library. Aside from the ethical concerns, it would be logistically a nightmare. So yeah, and this is also challenging, and we'll see that in a couple of slides here, our personal convictions versus our professional convictions. So we may personally think that perhaps that 12-year-old does not need to be checking out that particular item. But as a professional, we also recognize that every patron has the right to view the materials that they feel that they're ready for. Yes, to me, as not a parent, the comment in the chat here is about thanking the parent for their personal choices. As not a parent, and also as someone whose parents did not restrict my reading pretty much in any way, I do feel a little bad for the kids with parents who don't want them reading graphic novels or Harry Potter or this or that, or you could only read this specific topic. I think that that's very harsh for the kids, and I tend to trust the kids to make their own decisions. But also, these are the parents that are concerned for their children, and they're trying to be a good parent. So there's something to be said for that. Yeah. Now this next one here. Oh my, a parent considered Jane Austen racy. Ooh, ooh. Interesting. We had. That's the other thing. It's very hard to tell what people consider not okay for their kids or for others. We had a group in a previous library I worked at who didn't want children being read books in story times or checking out books that had talking animals in them, because animals don't talk. And do you realize how hard it is to do a story time without talking animals for like the preschool crowd? That's really difficult. So some very specific needs of very specific patron wishes. So this third one here, right to privacy and confidentiality. And this is a tricky one, especially in like the smaller libraries where you tend to know all of your patrons, or perhaps you even are a member of the community and are, acquainted with them or friends with them outside the library. So we protect each library user's right to privacy and confidentiality. So something like the patron comes to pick up their holds that they have available, and they say, while I'm here, does my spouse have any holds that I can pick up? I'd like to save a trip. Can we pick up my husband or wife's items on hold as well? What do you do? Do you say, yeah, here's your spouse's hold items? Yes, we don't allow that unless they give permission. This is another one, and I go back a lot to follow your library policy, check what your policy says, because I don't have control of individual library policies, but most policies should address things like this. Yes, we don't allow that unless they give permission. We have to have a note in their profile. Some libraries require the person to have their spouse's or family member's card. You get some things, and this is a very hard thing, like I said, especially in small communities. Um, oh, my neighbor's not able to make it. She said I could pick up her holds while I'm here. Well, what if your neighbor is, putting something on hold that she doesn't want the whole neighborhood to know about? What if your spouse has someone on, something on hold, like how to do a do-it-yourself divorce? That can be pretty awkward, and so each library user has a right to privacy. Yeah, and there are ways to work around this, like calling the patron or checking in with them. Um, if they have the card with them, that's usually a safe indicator. Um, but this can overlap with a lot of customer service. Uh, some patrons are like, well, you know me, I come in every day. I can't believe you're not letting me take all of our holds. I'm going to have to come back tomorrow. This is very inconvenient. So patrons sometimes prefer their convenience to their privacy, and it's a bit of a battle for us to walk that line. Or how about this? A patron is checking out a popular book. You happened to read that same book last week and you really enjoyed it. Do you mention it? Do you say, hey, that's a great book, I hope you enjoy? Or have you read the next in that series yet? Seems like a really good thing to say, right? Do we have a policy about how we comment on patrons' reading materials? This is a little bit more ambiguous, I find. Nobody jumping in yet. The mentioning or commenting on, yeah, this is a tough one because we instinctively want to comment on what someone else is reading and say, wow, if you like that, try this other one, this is great. But there's a good way to do it and a slightly invasive way to do it, and you want to be a little careful. It's kind of like if you're at the store and you're at the store checkout and you're buying a rather personal item from the drugstore, and you don't necessarily want the cashier to have a conversation about, whatever medication or item that you have in your basket. So maybe right now they're checking out this perfectly harmless mystery, but they also know that they are interested in checking out something that's a little more personal. and they don't necessarily want to think, oh, this person's going to ask me about my reading habits or comment on the books or say out loud about the titles that I'm reading. If you do want to have that interaction, and a lot of patrons as well as staff do appreciate recommendations. There's a lot of reading discussion that goes on at the circulation desk with informal recommendations. You can maybe do it in a more general way, like, did you find everything you're looking for? Or have you tried our book recommendation service? We have read alike for these genres. If you're interested, have maybe read alike bookmarks or pamphlets. Yeah, have a self-checkout machine if you're able to. It's very helpful. I know sometimes even working in a library, if I'm checking out an item that I don't necessarily want my coworkers to see, it's pretty uncomfortable to say, here, here's this book about personal stuff. Hard to avoid if we're checking out from the same library we're working at. But be mindful, there are ways to start conversations about reader's advisory and whether the patron is finding the books that they like without saying, oh, hey, that particular book, great choice. I'm trying to kind of hit the high points, but if you have a comment about points that I have not mentioned or situations that you feel might have been a bit of a dilemma that you're not sure how to handle, please put that in the chat. Jump right in. The interesting thing about library work is that it's something different every day, and we don't all get the same questions all the time. So feel free to share your experiences, and that's helpful for everybody in thinking through some of these things. We talked a little bit earlier about distinguishing our personal convictions and professional duties. Certainly that applies in recommending books that we would not necessarily enjoy or don't necessarily agree with, but that perhaps that patron finds are what they want. For example, a patron requests a book about a particular politician, for example. That's kind of a hot topic. You disagree with this politician's views. You find that the book is, you've heard in some reviews that this book is not the most accurate on matters of policy, and yet this person's very popular and the book is in high demand. What do you do? This can happen with a lot of things. It can happen with medical and health books, those fad diet kind of things, or the trends or things that we may not necessarily agree with one way or the other. Any comments about how to handle the personal versus the professional? Yes. Sometimes if it's a book that's popular but you haven't read it, of any genre, not just the political things you don't agree with, but the bestseller that you honestly don't find all that appealing. Oh, have you read this book? No, but it's very popular. Oh, that's been flying off the shelves. Hope you enjoy it. There's no necessity to state your disagreement. Something in the library for everyone. Also stated as there's something in the library to offend everyone. We get into that more, as I said, in the collection maintenance classes. So moving on to the Library Book of Rights, Bill of Rights, I'm sorry, have book on the brain. This is slightly more oriented toward the patron rather than the behavior of the staff, but it covers a lot of the same points. So again, I'll just read through some of these and then we'll discuss. Books and other library resources should be provided for the interest, information, and enlightenment of all people of the community. Materials should not be excluded because of the origin, background, or views of those contributing to their creation. Again, some of that is a collection maintenance kind of thing, and some of it is reader's advisory and how we handle patron interests. Libraries should provide materials and information presenting all points of view. Libraries should challenge censorship. Libraries should cooperate with resisting abridgment of free expression and free access to ideas. And a person's right to use a library should not be denied or abridged because of origin, age, background, or views. Libraries which make exhibit spaces and meeting rooms available to the public they serve should make such facilities available on an equitable basis. And again, here we are right to privacy and confidentiality. Libraries should advocate for, educate about, and protect people's privacy, safeguarding library usage data, including personally identifiable information. So again, we have a few scenarios here. And if you have similar scenarios or questions, please feel free to put those in chat as well. So going back to this first page here. Interest in information and enlightenment of all people of the community. So for example, you create a display and maybe the topic of the display is holidays around the world, and you have different books and materials related to different religious traditions. And a patron comments on the display and said, you know, why did you include this religion? We don't have anyone of that religion here. What's the point of, you know, why are you including this? What do you say to that patron? Yes, yes. This becomes much more personal once you've had complaints of this nature. Some patrons upset that you had the Quran on your shelf. Yes. We represent all religions. Heather, books are mirrors and windows. That's a great sentiment. Can you say more about what you mean by that? Yes, books can reflect the reader for themselves or also show them something that they're unfamiliar with. My usual response also includes that, it's certainly your choice to read what you wish. It's everyone else's choice in the community to read what they wish. If you don't care to read it, just leave it on the shelf. And this is not necessarily always about political or religious ideals. It can be something like a very popular author you've recently learned has committed a crime, or they are in some way not a good person, or they have harmful beliefs, or they're promoting a cause that is unpopular. And that's very problematic, because I know even a lot of library staff don't particularly want to buy books or promote books from authors who are problematic. And you'd be surprised at which authors are problematic in a lot of ways sometimes. Yes, problems with people defacing books they're upset with, including religious and political books. That is, damage to books is actually damage to taxpayer property. So that's a difficult thing to address. Similar to those who would like a book not to be on the shelves, so they check it out or sometimes steal it, but often check it out and just never bring it back. Yes, sometimes they'll move the books to a wrong place. A very good argument for shelf reading on a regular basis, to find the books that wander about the library seemingly by themselves. Trying to check on time here and make sure we're all set. A few other examples here. I'm sure that you've had scenarios that come up in your library as well. The right to use the library not being denied or abridged. This is a complicated one sometimes. A patron wishes to get a library card so that he can use the computers. However, your policy states that a person must provide proof of residency in the county. And this patron is homeless. They do not have proof of residency because they do not have an address. Do you have a policy addressing that, for one thing? See, I always go back to the policy. How would you handle that? Guest passes, yes. Photo ID, depending on address. Even photo IDs can be pretty difficult to get. There's, of course, quite a bit of debate about that as well. Courtesy cards, yes. I know some libraries issue specific cards to patrons who may be living at a homeless shelter or in transitional housing of some sort. where perhaps they have a limited number of items they can check out, or a shorter borrowing period, or something like that. But they also can check out limited items as well as get on computers or get access to the electronic resources. Yes, working with your community agencies. That's a great example. It's very difficult to just us to solve these problems. We frequently find that we get patrons in who have difficulties on a number of levels, and not all of those things are things that we specifically can address. You know, we can help people who are experiencing homelessness, but we are not necessarily able to provide them with shelter. We can provide them with resources. It's a tough balance. This one, number 6, exhibit spaces and meeting rooms available on an equitable basis. Does anyone know, do you have a meeting room policy, and what is allowed or not allowed? Some of it can be as simple as, yes, we allow organizational meetings, but no, they cannot sell merchandise or charge dues while they're on the property. Or no, we cannot have a church service or a birthday party or whatever in the library. Usually these rules are, the typical rules are no business transactions or sales of merchandise, and the meeting or event must be open to the public if the public should want to come. So and I'm trying to move along here because we do want to talk about customer service, other customer service scenarios as well. But this last point here as well, again, privacy and confidentiality. This is so important because if people can read whatever they want or look for the information that they want, but they have someone looking over their shoulder, that is not freedom to view materials. I know I've certainly had some very interesting internet searches at various points. Anyone who reads like mystery or true crime probably has searched for, how long does it take to poison someone with arsenic, or something like that, that perhaps you would not necessarily want on your search history on a public computer. This also involves what records we keep. For example, whether your library tracks what books patrons have had out previously. Now, patrons like it for us to do this and have that information available because they want to know whether they've read that book or not. But at the same time, there's a privacy issue with, if we get say a subpoena for that material by law enforcement, then that becomes something that we have to disclose. If we don't keep the information, we don't have to disclose it because we don't have it now, do we? So this is a concern kind of on the back end of a lot of circulation, our checkout and borrowing systems, our catalogs, that sort of thing. We also run into this, the example that I give. A police officer comes in to ask whether a particular patron was on the computer at a particular time and what websites they visited. What do you tell this person? Police officer comes in. Has anyone had this happen? Do you have a policy for it? And I always like to include this because it's one of those situations where in the moment, our reaction tends to be helpful, help find information. As a profession, we want to be helpful. It's very hard to determine when that is not necessarily our best instinct. Yeah, if it was a computer situation, the IT department would have to be. This is another thing about like using a computer management system such as deep freeze or that sort of thing to reset the computers after every time a patron uses it. Not only is that security for their information if they've been working on, like a job application or their unemployment where they would have to put in personal information, it also protects them from, to some extent, requests for their information. The general rule is if you have to look up the item on a computer, you cannot just disclose it to law enforcement. I'm not a lawyer, by the way, so this is just sort of a general rule of thumb for when you're faced with this scenario. If it is something that you have to look up on a computer, either in the catalog or what websites are visited or whatever, you're going to need a court order, subpoena, whatever. And that is above the pay grade of probably everyone in this conversation right now. That's your director or your branch manager needs to be involved in that. You're possibly the county attorney. Now, if it comes to, has this person visited the library today? Libraries are public spaces, so the fact of a person being in a public space is not a privacy issue. There is not necessarily an expectation of privacy when in a public space. You could come into the building and say, oh yes, this person was in the building today. But you don't want to give actual records. That's a great question. Stalking issues. We'll get into that also with the customer service. You're a little ahead of the game there. But this is for law enforcement only, like in the course of their job. And certainly that doesn't preclude a person in law enforcement from asking about a patron or staff member for the purpose of stalking them. This is only regarding law enforcement doing, normal law enforcement tasks. But yes, be wary of people who are asking information about staff and patrons. If typically we do not give information out to anybody really about patron whereabouts. And this you can run into, for example, you get a call from the parent. Is my child at the library? Put them on the phone. I need to talk to them. Okay, you don't know if that's the non-custodial parent who's trying to abduct the child. You can maybe say, well, we can't page anyone in the library, but I will put a note on the door, or I will look and have them call you. Again, you'd be surprised at how many people don't find this to be a common sense thing. Staff members giving out other staff members' work schedules is a problem. But yeah, when in doubt, try not to give specifics. Okay, we have about half an hour left, so we're going to transition a bit here, move on to the next topic. This, as I said, is not necessarily an ethical sort of topic. These Ranganathan's 5 Laws of Library Science, but they are sort of an overarching principle that you may want to keep in the back of your mind, and they can be applied in ways that we've talked about already. They're sort of broad principles. One, books are for use. That sounds kind of common sense, but perhaps it is not as common sense as one might think. 2, every reader, his, her, their book. 3, every book its reader. 4, save the time of the reader. And 5, the library is a growing organism. So what do any of those mean? I'm not going to tell you necessarily what they mean. They're pretty broad principles, but what are your thoughts on some of these rules or guidance? Any thoughts? A lot of these talk to not just library services, but also collections. Books are for use. They're save the time of the reader. That's an excellent point. It may speak to organization and access. For example, have books classified in a way that allows the reader to find them. It could save the time of the reader could also mean an approach to service of sometimes you want to help them find it themselves so they learn for next time, but also sometimes the patron needs you to just provide them the information. And that's kind of a judgment call as to when it's most appropriate to help them help themselves versus help them get the information immediately. The library is a growing organism. That can also mean a lot of things. As I said, these are very broad, overarching principles, and to discuss them all in depth would be very challenging. The library as a growing organism may talk about the collection and the resources we provide. We may weed the collection so that we can put new books on the shelves. We may stop subscribing to one database in order to provide another. We may allocate our resources in a certain way to reach certain goals. We add new programs and perhaps sunset other services. Things cycle, we're constantly regenerating ideas, focusing on new goals, closing out things that are no longer serving us. Yeah, moving from VHS to DVDs even, or from cassette tapes to streaming audio services. Yeah, and this, like I said, these are overarching principles that would touch things like collections as well as services, access to databases or to journals, programs that we may be providing. Yeah, reference collections. A lot of reference collections are now moving to circulating or even going away altogether. That also speaks to that books are for use. If you have a book on your reference collection that is not being used in-house, perhaps you want to put it in your circulating collection, or perhaps you want to replace that print encyclopedia with an online database that has the same information. So the main idea with a lot of these is the library is not a stagnant place of warehousing books on shelves. It is a place where our patrons interact with our resources, books, materials, programs, whatever. And yeah, things cycle through, things have a life cycle to them. And the point is for there to be that constant interaction between the patrons and the books and other resources that we provide. Yes, weeding, not a popular topic, but very, very important one. Again, I keep going back to, we will have other topics in this series, the reference one and also the collection maintenance one definitely will talk about weeding. Other comments about this? Okay, that, you know, use that as food for thought and perhaps come back to it at some later time. You'll find it popping into your head. Oh, every book its reader. Yes. Library is a growing organism. I always like to talk a little bit about customer service and communication because, as we said before, the library is kind of a specific place in that we have the opportunity to be not just a transactional place where people come and do a business or get a service and then leave. It's a place where it's more interactional. We have programs, we have reference interactions, we have patrons that are regulars, we have people coming in and being in the library as a space. The space itself is one of the services we offer, and that's a unique thing in a lot of communities. So the other two things is I don't feel like I need to tell anyone what good customer service looks like because we all have been customers and we all have, working in libraries, have served customers, either other staff members or patrons or both. And we are all always communicating. This, as I said, this picture here is of a customer service workshop. You cannot not communicate. We are communicating with our colleagues and patrons every time we're at work. So a few tips. As I said, a lot of this is very common sense and we're doing this on a daily basis anyway, but some guiding principles that I always like to point to, and then we do have some scenarios for this as well. Know your policies. I think I've mentioned policies today. Always know what rules you have in place for your own and for the patrons' safety and comfort. And have that on hand. If you have a printable rules sheet or post it in the lobby or something that you can point to or hand to a patron, that's always a good thing. Communicate and document if you have repeated interactions, and most libraries do have the sort of the frequent flyer problem situations. Incident reporting is important. Communication is important. If you're having a specific problem with this patron, chances are your colleagues are as well. If you feel that this person is hostile or problematic or harassing, probably they're that way to not only other staff, but also other patrons as well. Don't feel like, oh, it's just my problem to solve. I'm not going to share it with my team members. Even maybe, we feel embarrassed by this person singling us out. Yeah, they're probably like that with other people as well. Document, document, document. If the only time your administration hears about this problem is when it is escalated to the point that you really need to throw this person out or to issue them a barring for a period of time, but you don't have your documentation in place, it's going to be very hard to address that behavior. Support one another. If you notice your colleague is struggling, help them out. Ask if you can intervene. Check in with them. Have a system of, oh, do you need to take your break? I can take over from here. Let them tag out if they need to. Have some key phrases as well. And we'll go over that in a second. But if you're like most people, sometimes under stressful situations, the right phrasing doesn't come to mind immediately. Have something on repeat so that you can just roll things right out. You know what you want to say in a given situation. Have some phrases on the tip of your tongue so that you don't have to fumble. This last one is a little counterintuitive, but it's very useful. Give the patron a chance to comply. If you've asked them to do something like, I will need you to stop doing this. I'll need you to put on your mask while you're in the library. I need you to corral your children before they knock more books off the shelves. I need you to not be talking quite so loudly on your cell phone. Step back, walk away, give them a chance to do the thing before you reapproach and expect the instant resolution. Some people need just a few minutes to process. Another thing about this customer interaction, be safe, be aware, pay attention. If you need to refer to a supervisor, that's hardly ever a bad thing. If they say, I want to talk to your manager, I want to talk to the branch manager, I want to talk to the director, have that person's business card in hand, have it at the desk, hand it out like candy. If they want to talk to the director, there you go, have a nice day. They'll be in, they're not in right now, but call them and leave a message. I'll pass your complaint on. Comment cards are really useful too. If you have someone who's wants to complain about something, the act of having to write it down on a card and document it sometimes will de-escalate them. So very useful tool there. Some useful phrases. In general, I like to give the patrons an out. Don't make them feel like they have to back down from their stance, because most people don't like to do that. So something like, I'm sure you didn't realize it, but we don't allow this behavior in the library. Now, if you have this with the repeat patron who's, in the library talking loudly every day for a week, the third or fourth day in a row that you've had to warn them, you probably don't need to use this phrase. But in general, this gives them an out. Oh, I'm sorry, I did not know that cell phones were not allowed in the library. I will put it away. Give them a way to comply without losing face. What we can do for you is this. Give them options. We can't do X, but we can do Y or Z. You've met their needs to the best of your ability. You have not said no. You can't do exactly what they want, but you are offering them a solution. Let me check with someone else about this. Sometimes that buys you a little time, or as I said, sometimes it's okay for them to want to talk to a manager. This next one here, for the patrons who have trouble disengaging, the ones who would like to keep you talking for an entire day. All right, well, here's that information you needed. This is sometimes you walk them to the shelf item. If you need anything else, let us know. I need to help these other patrons. We'll check back in with you. You know, don't make them feel abandoned, but also don't feel like you need to stand there letting them monopolize your time while you have other things to do. This next one is a great way to redirect. Sometimes our patrons say things to us that are pretty inappropriate, and if they're that borderline area between kind of weird and okay, that's definitely harassment and you need to leave. If it's the plausible deniability zone, you can say, is there a library related question I can help you with? This is good for like political discussions or invitations to go to church with them or asking you for your phone number or any of those. I really don't want this personal conversation with this patron. We're not allowed to discuss that. Is there a library related question I can help you with? These two in conjunction work great for redirecting. And this last one, for jokes that aren't really jokes, this is a nice technique. They make perhaps a politically charged comment or a harassing sort of thing or a questionable of any sort that makes it seem as though they're joking, but what they're really doing is checking to see if you are with them on a particular hot topic. Oh, I don't understand. Can you explain what you mean by that? Oh, I'm not sure I get the joke. A lot of times when people are testing the waters of being harassing or inappropriate and you ask them to explain, they don't want to have to explain it in bold print. They wanted you to subtly agree with them. So have some of those available. Oops. And we do have time for some customer service scenarios here. So I'll read out a few and we can have discussion. How about this one? A regular patron often gives compliments to a young circulation clerk and spends a long time talking to this particular staff member. Today, the patron has brought in a small gift for their favorite staff member. If you're the staff member or if perhaps you're the colleague that's working alongside of this person, what do you do? How do you handle this particular situation? Go ahead and type your answers in the chat here. Yes, this has actually happened. I will say if I present a scenario in a customer service training, it's usually because it's actually happened. And these are the less weird of the things that I've run across. Yes, our policy states we are unable to accept gifts. Get the person off the desk and deal with it. This is a good time for a coworker to tag that person out. If this is an ongoing thing, I'll go back. Document and communicate. Have you as a staff member mentioned this to your branch manager? Have you asked your coworkers whether this person has interacted with them in the same way? Maybe they're just lonely. Maybe they're borderline stalker. It kind of depends on the scenario, but keep in mind if they're being inappropriate or clingy with one person, they may potentially be doing it with more. My policy is staff members should never be harassed at their job. So if this person is monopolizing the staff member's time and it feels inappropriate or creepy or borderline stalky, the manager should maybe have a conversation with that person and say, our staff member is trying to do a job. Please let this person do a job. Yeah, staff member had to relocate. I personally, if I were the manager, would have relocated the patron to removing some library privileges, but that's not always a practical scenario either. Let's see, another one here. An adult accompanies a small child to the library and allows the child to run around the room and knock items off the shelves. When you ask the adult to address the child's behavior, they take the child into the restroom, scolding them loudly, and you hear what sounds like several slaps and the child screaming. This is unfortunately a sort of common one also. What do you do? A lot going on that scenario. I'm going to post that in the chat here. So that is posted in the chat. What issues do we have here? We have a lot of stuff going on here. Yeah, check for one thing and see if they're okay. And that brings up an interesting point. The customer interaction tips I should have included. Check on the patrons or greet them or acknowledge them or make them feel seen during interactions. Prior to interactions, if they come in regularly, say hello, greet them when they come in the library. It does two things. If you're checking on your patrons, greeting them proactively, acknowledging them proactively as they come in, they feel welcome and seen. And also the people that are potentially doing things that you don't want them to do also feel seen. And most people, when they feel like someone is watching, do not do the things you don't want them to do. So something like knocking on the door, you know, a simple, is everything okay? Is there something we can help you with? A lot of people are not necessarily going to beat their child in public. That's why they took them in the restroom. So knowing that that's not, you know, appropriate is a thing you can do. Other solutions. What, for one thing, you've got a lot going on here. You have a child that's not being supervised. You've got, it sounds like potentially abuse. You've got the noise disturbance. Other thoughts or comments here? Okay, so designated children's area. I will say louder noise is sometimes appropriate in the children's area, and the children's department tends to be a little more kid safe than, say, the computer lab or the adult reading area, whatever. I have heard from my children's colleagues, though, that they also do not want unattended children screaming and running in their department either. So don't be careful not to just sort of fob them off. The thing that we frequently get asked, public library staff are not mandatory reporters, but that does not mean that you cannot report suspected abuse. If you believe that a parent is inappropriately disciplining their child, or if you see signs that a child is potentially being abused, you can report that. It works like the anonymous reporting from, if you were just reporting something you'd seen in a grocery store, whatever. Contact your social services department if you want to know how to do that or what questions or the procedure. I know that that's not perfect, but I have also seen scenarios where staff should have reported and didn't, and things got worse. So pay attention to not only your own policies, but what services are available. In terms of noise, you're allowed to ask the parent to supervise their child. The child should not be running around in disorder. Physically being in the same space as the child is not supervision when the kid is little. So encourage the parent or caregiver to address the child before it gets out of hand. If the kid is done and needs to take a break for the day, say, sounds like perhaps you need to go out and come back later. It's very complicated sometimes. Let's see. We have time for maybe one or two more. A group of teens is roaming around the library taking photos and videos with their phones. They're not being noisy, but they have approached staff and asked questions while recording the interaction. What do you do about this? That's a good question. Let's presume that they did not ask for permission to record. Now, a couple of things going on here. As I said before, libraries are considered public places. Technically, it is allowed to take photos or videos in a public place. There is not an expectation of privacy in public. However, most library codes of conduct also have a policy of some sort that says that disturbing or harassing or otherwise bothering other patrons and staff is not inappropriate. So if they're just taking pictures and videos and doing their little social media thing, that's one thing. But if they're following someone around or harassing staff or making concerted effort, making someone else feel uncomfortable by doing what they're doing, that isn't covered by the public place. That's becoming a nuisance or a harassment issue. And you can address it not as, well, you can't take video in the library, but as you can't follow people around taking pictures and making them feel uncomfortable. Yeah, that's a good point. If they're playing games or being silly, the fact that they're being watched and interacted with by uncool adults is probably going to kind of ruin it for them. There's a sort of a thing that's become an issue lately of what's called First Amendment audits of people going into public buildings, libraries, other government offices, that kind of thing, and recording interactions. And they can be a little bit creepy. And you can see that on, like, the ALA website has something on First Amendment audits. I'm not sure what they think they're auditing, but they frequently post them on YouTube. But it's a thing that is an interaction, and if you're not prepared for it, it's very awkward. But if you know, oh, they're just recording, they're doing this thing, you can be very neutral, and it kind of takes the fun out of it. They still are bound by the rules of the library and have to comply with staff directions. So, okay, we are at 12:01, so we are at time. Does anyone have any specific last questions about library stuff before we close for today? As I said, if you have questions about this or about any future training or about customer situations, feel free to email me. The recording will be posted, hopefully sooner rather than later.